Hi, this is PatZi with a Z. Welcome to Joy on Paper Live, a program for writers and those who dream of writing, and for everyone who wants to know the story behind the book. And we have a fascinating story today because my guest is David Brown, and he's written a fantastic book called Hard Rain. And here it is. Hi, David.
Hi, Patsy. Thank you for having me on your program. It's lovely.
Okay, it's always great, especially to talk to somebody in Spain. I love Spain. What can I say? This book is so great. What I will tell you, I have had my own experience with the IRA.
Really?
Oh, very close experience. I was about 30 minutes away from the Harrods bombing in 1983.
Oh, gosh, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you weren't in it. I'm glad you're here now.
Oh, yes, because that was pretty scary. And of course, you were there in Northern Ireland at a terrible time. It was called the Troubles. It was Troubles, all right. And that was from
Mm.
1969 to 1972. And this book is it's just fascinating what you've done with it. You've It's basically the story of I think, your exploits and all the fantastic things that you did. I just want to tell people that just so they know that you were in the military for 40 years and Queen Elizabeth gave you the BEM, which is the British Empire Medal military, and the
Correct.
MBE, Member of the British Empire Medal. Wow,
Indeed.
that's pretty good.
Yeah. I was very proud to receive them. It was a wonderful experience meeting the Queen, and she was a fantastic lady.
Oh, what a very special thing to happen in your life. And
Indeed.
coming from where you came from, in England, it's funny. Everybody knows where people come from. I lived in, I'm of course American. I was born in Michigan, but I moved to England when I was 21 and bought a cottage there because I wanted to
Really?
live in England. And I was always so amused how the minute someone opened their mouth in England, every British person knew exactly where they came from, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, the accents are quite varied.
Oh, yes. And people recognize them and they know exactly where you came from. So you didn't come from one of those poshy areas of town.
No, I was born in Cambridge, and most people associate Cambridge with the universities, but the area I was born in was a bit of a really, you'd have to call it a slum. Victorian, two up, two down, toilet in a small yard at the back, and an alleyway running down the back. Not the greatest of places. And then, of course, the first chance I got, I left school at 15 and joined the army straight away. And I found out that you could have three cooked meals a day, which was a bit of a novelty.
And of course, now this hard rain, you have a character, I think, based on yourself. Was your nickname Bomber?
Well, no, not really, because Brown is the name I write under. But of course, anybody in the army in my time that was called Brown automatically got the nickname Bomber. The same with anybody who was called White, got the name Chalky, and their name was Clark, they were called Nobby. I have no idea why, how these names started. The only one I can think of with Bomber Brown is that during the First World War, there was a poem written, and it was called Sorry, I'll start again. Bomber Brown, and his job was to get into the enemy trenches and throw bombs at them. And it was quite a good poem, and that caught the public's imagination. That's probably where the Bomber Brown came from. But the others I don't know about. So it's a bit of a mystery. But the character, the central character, Bomber Brown, yes, he's based on a lot of my experiences and the character's based a lot on me, but also he's a mix of several other people as well that I knew in Northern Ireland. And so all the experiences are based on those characters and stories I heard and stories that were told, and of course, writer's imagination.
You have quite I don't know actually if it's so much imagination because things were pretty bad up there. And it's for people who don't know, we're so surrounded. Younger people now, they know about the Ukraine, which they didn't know about. But still, of course, having lived in England, we were searched when we went into theaters. That's back in the 80s. We were searched. When we went, we didn't just walk in with a purse, they checked us.
Yeah.
And so, having lived like that, people in the States haven't gone through that really. And so they don't understand all these conflicts, especially the Northern Ireland one is hard to understand. It's,
Yes, it's for people who haven't been associated with it closely, and even in England, a lot of people don't understand it. But of course, you've got to go back a long way in history. You can go back 300 or 400 years to the Battle of the Boyne with William of Orange and King James. But I think the modern troubles really stem from the 1920s when England wanted to give Ireland back its independence, and but they decided that it would be done on a referendum of the people by counties. So what happened there was 6 counties in the north voted to remain part of United Kingdom and Britain, and the rest wanted to be an independent island. So we ended up with a Northern Ireland and the rest of Ireland, which we call Southern Ireland, but of course covers the other points of the compass as well. And the nationalists really didn't like this at all, and they started a civil war of their own against their own people in Southern Ireland and Northern Ireland. But fortunately, the Irish government that had then formed managed to put that war, which it was a civil war, down and managed to get control. But the Irish Republican Army never went away, of course, and many people forget during World War II, the Irish Republican Army sided with Nazi Germany and started a bombing campaign in Britain, which fortunately the British intelligence services and security forces managed to put down quite quickly. But that's going back in history. Then in the 50s, we had cross border attacks by the Irish Republican Army into the north, and they were targeting people like policemen, prominent people, judges, anybody in any form of authority, or anybody, in fact, who didn't agree with them. And then they'd dash back over the border. But in 1969, of course, that's when civil unrest broke out on a big scale, and the police actually lost control after some few days, weeks of this, and the British Army was called in, and for about 6 weeks we had a really peaceful period where both sides, the Catholic and the Protestant sides, welcomed us as peacekeepers. And I remember standing on the dividing line between two communities and having cups of tea and sandwiches brought out to me by both sides. And then that probably was the period when the politicians had a chance to make some impact, but it failed. They didn't manage to do that. And that's when the IRA really took advantage and started a shooting and bombing campaign. And that's when really the troubles, I always call it a terrorist war, because you call it the troubles and it just sounds an annoying neighbor parking his car in your parking space or kicking your dustbin over now and again. But it really was a brutal terrorist war.
I think some people have heard recently a little bit more about the IRA because there's been news about Lord Mountbatten's
Yeah.
murder. And
Yeah.
of course, the IRA did that. And it was, as you said, it was really a terror campaign. And sometimes it was hard to tell where the lines were drawn because they were killing everybody, anybody.
The problem with terrorists, they don't care who they kill. Really trying to do is, it's called terrorism, is rule by terror. And anybody that disagrees with them, doesn't matter whether they're, in this case, Catholic or Protestant, you either kill them or kill a member of their family until they come in line with your thinking. The problem for the security forces is if you're trying to fight terrorism, urban terrorism, or whatever type of terrorism, you start with your hands tied behind your back by the rule of law. And interestingly enough, as soon as I arrived in Northern Ireland at the start of the war, I was given what we called a yellow card. and it told you when and where you could use lethal force. In other words, shoot somebody. But there's sort of get out clause on it, because if you'd followed it to the letter until you got to this final paragraph, you'd have never even put a bullet in your rifle. It said if you genuinely believe someone's life is in danger or your own life is in danger, you may use lethal force. That's all very well, but when things are happening, if you're six of you faced with a crowd of 300 or 400 rioters throwing petrol bombs, nail bombs, with a couple of gunmen mixed up in them, it takes a lot of discipline to maintain your control and not just shoot indiscriminately. And I was very proud of the people I served with that that never happened.
But the idea of it, some of the actions were so gruesome and indiscriminate, where children were killed, women and children were killed, and these
Yeah.
terrible nail bombs. And as I said, living in England, we were all was just a little bit wary at that point in time because we knew you didn't know where it would happen. And we were always, particularly I remember going in cinemas and big stores like Harrods, we thought about it. And then they did these stupid things where they called up 30 minutes in advance and told you there's a bomb. That, as a matter of fact, for Harrods, I think if the people had run out, more people would have been killed because that's where I used to park behind Harrods on Crescent, Hans Crescent. It was really a terrible thing that was going on. So when you tell us about some of the stories in here, this book is filled with some of them. They're so terrible. Only knowing and having known soldiers, I understand how you've gone through it. But writing this must be a little bit traumatic for you, a little bit of PTSD.
It was a form of release. I'd never really told anybody about my military service apart from funny stories at dinner parties or whatever. But it was my late wife who sadly was dying and spent a lot of her time at home in bed. And she decided to write short stories about a friend's dog because she hadn't got anything else to do, which were it's inspired me to sit down at the same time because I had to stay at home with her and start writing about my experiences. And it was like really a dam bursting. I suddenly found all the words pouring out of me, and I just was typing as fast as I can with two fingers. And I didn't bother with the full stops, commas, or anything like that. I just put as much down as I could as it came out. So really, it was a bit of a release for me in some ways. And but yeah, some of the things, such as bombings, when a bomb had gone off and you turned up and there was people lying in the street, children, women, didn't matter whether they were Catholic or Protestant. This really is something that you see and never ever forget what these people were capable of doing to normal human beings. Some people will probably put it down in history as a war between Catholic and Protestant. It wasn't at all. It's a war between good and evil. A lot of Catholic and Protestants got on so well together and joined forces to bring peace about, but really it was a war against good and evil. And fortunately, after 30 years, the good won.
When I think about it and I think about all of these things that you went through, I don't know what stories, are there some particular stories you want to talk about? I was like just reading about this Paddy the pistol. I got so mad. How could he just stand there and shoot people, not knowing who they were, just shoot them?
Yeah, I think his sort of cover that the IRA would orchestrate a riot somewhere and security forces would have to cordon the streets off and just contain it until it ran out of steam. And what he'd do is, as the rioters got close to the security forces, just step out from behind, fire a few rounds, hoping to hit either the police or the security forces, and then disappear back behind the crowd so he couldn't be shot. But this particular area in the book we talk about near Flack Street Mill, there was an illegal drinking den, which was a way of raising money for the IRA. most of the alcohol was either stolen or smuggled in from across the border. And he would obviously get fueled up a bit with alcohol and then come out and try and shoot any of the Protestant people on the other side of the road in the night if they were leaving their houses. And yeah, he was an unpleasant character with no moral scruples whatsoever and no thoughts about who might he kill. It's just something he could do because it made him a big man in the community.
You mentioned border. The border was difficult for people to realize. They never built a border wall. They never
No,
actually closed it off, did they?
no. Something I would have liked to have seen them done, but of course, the border's 300 miles long. And even if you built a fence the whole length of it, they could just take a small motorboat and drive out to sea, come round in the dark, and land on the other side. But with a border that long, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of crossing places. You could just walk across fields. And for some reason, the British government, probably in conjunction with the Irish, Southern Irish government, never ever decided to do anything like that. What they did later on, of course, was destroy some of the road crossings and put spikes in so that you couldn't drive a vehicle across. But that didn't
Yeah.
stop anything really because you could just walk round. You had to have visual eyes on the whole 300 miles of it, which wasn't a practical proposition at the time. Remembering, we have to remember, and readers have to remember at this time, the book was written in the time of the Troubles, this period covers to 72. No mobile phones and communication systems were as advanced as they are now. Now every soldier has a personal communication system in his helmet, or if he doesn't have that, he has a mobile phone. So everything's instantaneous now, whereas in those days it wasn't, which made things much more difficult if you wanted to control a large area of border.
You had already served in foreign countries before you got to Ireland, right?
Correct. Yeah, yeah. I When I joined the army at 15, it wasn't permissible by law to send you abroad out of the country. So I stayed with my training unit and got a very good education through the army education system. And then when I was 17, I got posted to join my regiment, which had just started a 2 year tour in the Middle East in Aden, or what is now the Yemen, whereas that area, which we would call southern Yemen now, was a conglomeration of tribal states. And then, of course, the war started there with a tribe called that nicknamed themselves the Wolves of Fan, being a mountainous region right on what is the north and south Yemen border. And they wanted to control that. And then the communists from North Yemen got involved, and that's when the war started for real.
Of course, you wrote about that in your book, The Wolf, right?
The
The
Wolves
Wolf
of
of
the
Red
Red
Fan.
Fan, yeah,
Yes.
yeah, I did indeed. That was my first attempt at writing, a little, perhaps a little bit naive with the way I went about it and accepting the publisher's view of how it should be done. But in Hard Rain and later on The Darkness, the one that follows on from Hard Rain, I've done it more myself. And then I had the great help from Linda, a lady who is now my new wife. And she's great for doing the editing and proofreading and telling me where I should put full stops.
That's part of the writing process. You learn as you go.
Yeah,
You get better. This is the great thing about writing is that you start late in life and you can just keep going. My
yeah,
oldest
yeah.
guest was 100 years old, and she had
Wow,
just written a book about cybercrime. So,
really?
yes, she got the idea when she was 98, did like a year and a half of research, and wrote a book, a mystery about cybercrime. At
That's
100,
fantastic.
she celebrated her birthday with me. So,
That
and
is
my
absolutely fantastic.
so you got me years more to go. And this is the fun thing about becoming a writer, isn't it?
I think so because I was able to write Hard Rain quite quickly, and then I thought I can't stop it there because I kept operating in Northern Ireland until the end of 1976. So I then started writing The Darkness, which is now out. And since then, I've had a little break. And now I'm on the fourth book, of which involves the central character, Bomber Brown. And hopefully, I'll have that finished this year. So maybe next year it'll come out. But I shall choose a different path in the way I get it published, I think. As you say, we learn as we go on when we write. And I think I've learned a few lessons with the first three books.
Well, it is. It takes time. I've had many authors on here who they've written, I don't know, 10 books, and then suddenly it's the 11th book that
Yeah,
just finally it's like everything falls in place. So but it's great, and this is a wonderful read. It's exciting. I love, mostly I read military books. That's,
really.
yes, before I started the radio program, I really didn't read anything but military books or history books. So definitely, this is exciting. I love the way you write.
Thank
There's certainly a lot of action, and sometimes I think like too much what you've gone through.
you. When I look back on it now, I find it quite exhausting, but that was the life at the time. People forget the British, perhaps don't now, because it's been in the news. The British Army is very small. When I first joined it, it was virtually twice the size it is now. And all the time I was serving, it was getting smaller and smaller. And I remember finishing the first 2 year tour in Northern Ireland, 1969. We had 2 year tour, and we were sent back to England to a place called Tidworth, and we were told because we'd done a 2 year tour, we definitely wouldn't go back to Northern Ireland for over a year. And I remember it quite clearly. We'd had a big party in the mess, and I was a little bit hungover, and there was a banging on the door saying, voice shouting, "Come on, we're being deployed back to Northern Ireland. You've got 2 hours to get ready." And within 2 hours, we were all driving our vehicles to Liverpool and getting on the ferry, the military ferry, to take the whole battalion back to Northern Ireland. And that's how it went, really, for every year. I think we just kept getting redeployed. We didn't get redeployed for a 2 year tour as a resident unit, as they called it, but it would be 6 months or 3 months or 6 weeks. You never knew. It just depended what the situation was, what operation the generals decided to implement, and so on. So it was a very fast life, and we worked hard, we played hard, and we perhaps did drink a little bit too much as well.
Oh, I'm sure you did, especially in Ireland. That would not be a problem.
No, it wouldn't be. It wouldn't be
It
indeed.
wouldn't. But did you have was your family, did it have a military background? What possessed you at the age of 15 too? Most 15-year-olds don't think about that, even for 3 square meals.
I think from the age of about 13, I considered it because remember that I was born in 47. We were only 2 years after the end of the war, less than that, 18 months after the end of the war. We still had rationing in the country for food, and all the comics and all those sort of things that I would have access to somehow all had things about the war. And at 14, with a group of friends, I think six of us indeed, we'd all talked about what to do when we left school. And in those days, mostly you left school at 15. If you were lucky, you went on to a higher education for another year. But the jobs on offer were things like being a butcher's boy, paint spraying in Marshalls of Cambridge, or a apprentice toolmaker, where you'd end up sweeping the floor for a couple of years and making the tea for everybody. None of that appealed to me. And I thought, no, definitely going in. And actually, all six of us joined the army, not in the same regiment or organization, but we all joined at the same time and went our various ways and all had pretty successful careers in one way or another.
For the British, as you said, the army is getting smaller. And I was surprised when, what, a month ago, think the prime minister said something about sending forces to the Ukraine, and I thought, oh my gosh, that would be a big mistake for England. I don't think they have the forces
No,
for it.
we would be able to put probably a brigade in there with very modern equipment and things like that. They are actually spending a lot of money catching up because I think the Ukrainians have shown the way in the development of warfare with using aerial drones and ground drones and sea drones to counteract the lack of actually having soldiers on the ground to match the enemy. But we couldn't do it on our own. We would have to do it with the rest of NATO if that was to happen. And politicians really do talk quite foolishly sometimes when they talk about these things, saying, oh, well, do this and it'll all be over by Christmas. It's rubbish. You've only got to look back in the past, and every time we've gone in somewhere, Vietnam, Afghanistan, wherever, it's not a few months or a year, it's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. And people are either still there or governments are desperately looking for a way to actually get out of the conflict without losing face. These things are solved by short term action. We've had the bombing in Iran, which, in my opinion, was long overdue, but it's not the end of it. We are now going to see a long period of hostility between Iran and the rest of the free world while they have a fanatical religious leader. And all fanatics are the same. They will do anything to gain more power. We see it in Putin, we've seen it in Hitler, we've seen it in Mussolini, we've seen it in Franco. They will do anything. And once they have complete control of a country, that is when they become extremely dangerous. And the Ayatollahs in Iran are extremely dangerous. So it's not going to stop overnight just because we've bombed a few facilities to develop a nuclear bomb. It isn't going to be done that quickly.
No, and but definitely I didn't want to see the British on the ground in the Ukraine because
No,
they're being killed like crazy over there. It's awful.
it,
And
it wouldn't happen because the current government would never ever get it through Parliament to go in on our own. The only way it would happen is if NATO went in complete, and then the British would, being part of NATO, would put a contingent in. There's no way British soldiers or airmen would ever be deployed there on their own without the rest of NATO.
what about when you went to Ireland the first time? How long were you supposed to be there? What did they tell you? It's going to
Uh,
be over?
no, and I mean, we had quite a lot of different governments at the time, and I'm quite scathing of politicians at times, but to be fair, I think all the politicians, no matter which party they were, realised that this was going to be a long war of nutrition. And the reason the IRA came to the table to negotiate peace was because none of the governments, whichever they were, Labour, Conservatives, or whoever, would actually give up. They put the people first and said, no, we are here to defend the people and we will keep defending them until you stop your violence. And which they achieved in, I think it was 1998 or 9, 30 years on. While the IRA might use their propaganda machines to say it was a victory, no way was it. They were ground down until they were ground down to a halt. My only criticisms of the thing was the government at the time gave IRA murderers, bombers, out of jail free card, basically, whereas they never wrote anything in to protect the police or the security forces against any spurious claims of murder or whatever against them. And this is why you see we had long ago, you probably read about it a couple of years ago, an 84-year-old, 85-year-old soldier being taken back to Northern Ireland to be charged with manslaughter. Sadly, he died during the trial. And recently, we've had some coroner that 4 SAS soldiers should be prosecuted for illegal killing. This story is amazing. The IRA stole a truck, a big truck, builder's truck, mounted a heavy caliber machine gun on it, and drove round to a police station to kill all the policemen there and whoever else was there, civilians as well, and started machine gunning the police station. An SAS patrol, 4-man patrol, caught up with these guys, and in the gun battle, the 4 IRA men were killed. And the coroner, for some reason, has come up with the SAS soldiers did not give the IRA men sufficient warning to surrender. Is he mad? They've got a machine gun, they're machine gunning people. What are you going to do? Walk out to them and say, look here, chaps, I think you should surrender now, otherwise we're going to have to shoot back. Crazy. So now there's a chance that these 4 men will be prosecuted just because of some silly inquiry that has no contact with reality.
That's ridiculous. I don't know. Sometimes the world is really upside down.
It is indeed. I know how these people feel because I think probably it was about 1975 or some towards beginning of 76. I had a knock on the door, and it was 2 Special Investigation Branch policemen telling me such and such an incident I was involved in, and I would be required to go back to Northern Ireland to stand trial.
Oh,
And I said, and it wasn't just me; it was my boss at the time, who was a captain, and another chap. And I set out, went to the bank, drew out all my money, packed my bag, and I was ready to disappear. There was no way I was going back to Northern Ireland for people to take pot shots at me. And fortunately, this went up to much higher level, and the 3 of us were exonerated, and the prosecution was dropped. But the effect it can have on you and members of your family, close friends, is quite traumatic. For me, it wasn't. I was still relatively young, and I was quite prepared to disappear to another country and start again, which I, like all good people, I think when you're in these situations, you should have a plan B. My plan B was almost put into action.
yeah, it's a good idea.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So tell us about the writing process. Once you started writing, and this is what I always explain about the joy on paper, that once you start seeing your words on paper, it does give you a really special feeling, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And I was excited by your title, Joy on Paper. I thought, what a great title that is. And you're right. When I started writing the second book, Hard Rain, I got such a thrill when paragraphs were flowing together and the storylines were just running straight through my head and straight onto the paper, and the words were appearing. I would quite often, at the end of the day, sit there and read through about 6 or 7 times, not making any changes or anything at that time, but just enjoying what had gone down. And the next day, doing the same thing again. It really is, if people are listening to this or see this, they should just try writing things down and feeling the thrill of it. And if they haven't got a story that they want to write, just think of anything that's happened to you that's nice or traumatic or whatever, and just write it in short lines, a bit like you would a poem, but it doesn't have to be a poem, it can be anything. And just put those down in short lines underneath and let them flow, let them come out. And before you know it, you've got something that's really interesting and exciting, and you can discuss it with other people and show them it. I've actually written a few. I call them poems. I don't think they are at all. I think they're just something humorous. And on the back of Hard Rain, of course, I wrote Bomber's Lament, which I think is something that I wrote about halfway through writing the book, because that was something that my belief in God, my religion, is something that has kept me going through difficult times. And but there are times when I was in Northern Ireland, I doubted God's existence and my belief. But at the end of it, I knew I did believe, and my belief came stronger at the end of it.
I thought that was it was nice to put that right on your Amazon page so people can see it. It is a list, it is a lament, and it tells people something about what they can look forward to in reading your book because it, it's all there. The words start pouring out at some point when you start writing, and all these ideas, all these stories, they just come back to you.
Yeah, they do. And when I started writing the first book, I had no idea about publication or anything, and it was Austin Macaulay that I sent it off to them, and they wanted to print it. But I think people shouldn't be afraid to write. It doesn't matter so much that whether it's published or not, but you've put it down and write it. You can these days you can get them things printed up quite easily and cheaply, and you can have copies for your friends to give out. They make nice presents, even if it's just a story about your early childhood, where you lived, how you were brought up, what your family life was like, and when you first started work, and your first girlfriend. All makes great reading, and people shouldn't be afraid to actually put the words down.
It's been a tradition with the British military to do this, and I am so grateful because I'm writing a book about India in 1875, and
Well,
my joy is the joy that of reading the words that soldiers, British soldiers, put on paper. So many of them, when they came back home, if they survived India, because a lot of them didn't. But when they get back home, they would write books. And it was so great when I discovered, as I'm doing research, I discovered one book after another, and from all ranks. It
yeah,
doesn't matter. Everybody had a story. And you're right. Preserve those stories, tell those stories. And some are like, can be just for family, but then some like yours is can be easy. It's just they're just for a wider audience.
yeah. And that period you're talking about, 1875 in India, probably fascinating period, an incredible period. And you only got to read the poems and stories by Rudyard Kipling that to get some idea. And I'd love to get a copy of your book when it's published because it's always the Indian Army's always been a fascination for me. What they got up to, and some of the things they got up to was not very nice, but it was all part of
Well,
creating what is now modern India. Um,
exactly.
and the Indian nation have a very strong military tradition. And we see it today that India has a very strong military, and it needs to because it's got China on its northern border, Pakistan on its western border, and Bangladesh on its eastern. It tends to be a central area where there could be a lot of conflict in the future.
Yes, and back in the 1800s, wow, it was nonstop with the Punjab Wars, at the
Yep.
frontier, everything that was going on in India. Wow, it's a fascinating period. Now, my
Yeah.
problem is I've got 183,000 pages.
Oh, it's going to be a big book.
It's going to be a very big book. But at some point, I'm going to have time to cut it down because it's a little
Yeah.
excessive. But it's so much fun. The writing process is just so much
Yeah.
fun.
You can have a trilogy. You can
Yeah, that's right.
break it
That's what
down
I'm
into
going to have to
three
do.
volumes. Yeah.
So I'm so glad that you found this joy on paper because I named it that way because, first of all, it's joy just to see your words, and then it's a joy for the reader to read those words.
Yeah.
And that's,
It is indeed. Yeah. And I worry about the younger generations, my grandchildren, because reading books seem to have gone out of the curriculum at schools and it's all done on iPads and things. But I've been told that book sales, hard copies rather than ebooks, back on the rise and they're picking up quite a lot. And I always try and send my grandchildren books as presents as opposed to anything else, because I think one of the greatest joys in life is to be able to read. Because if you're reading from a book, something that's tactile there, and you're quiet and you read a sentence or a paragraph, your imagination takes over and it paints a picture in your mind. If it's describing somebody or a landscape or what is happening, it paints a picture, and it may be a totally different picture in your mind to somebody else's. And that's really one of the great joys with books, is that, they get the imagination and the mind working, and that's
Is
what we really need.
it is the feeling of the book that you do not get this from reading on a pad or on a device. It's your mind doesn't work that way. Our minds are, they need to see the words, and then the words stay in our minds.
Yeah.
And I will read digital books, but they never stay with me. But
No.
I can read a book like this, and I can thumb through and I'll find I'll find a chapter like patty bashing. And I'll say,
Yeah.
okay. And I remember these things. So I love it. And you've
Yeah.
done a really great job with writing this book. I think it's lots of fun to read.
Thank you.
And I'm so in awe of you because you've done so much. And you are responsible for doing half of what's in this book. You're a real hero. And
Thank you for saying that, but a lot of the credit goes to a lot of other people. As I say, the central character, Bomber Brown, is probably made up of at least three other people, and he's quite a complicated chap, because he's not only got my character and my problems in him, but he's got at least two other people's as well. He encompasses a lot of things that soldiers experience, and the aftermath of those experiences as well.
I think you've done a great job with this book. It's available on Amazon, and it's called Hard Rain, and by David Brown. And everyone, really, this is a great read. I think you'll enjoy it. And David, thank you so much for joining me today on Joy on Paper Live.
Thank you very much for having me with you, PatZi. I've enjoyed this immensely. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next book is coming out when?
The next book is now out, and it's called The Darkness.
Okay, I'll get that one. And as soon as I read it, I'll have you back. How about that?
That will be fantastic. Thank you so
Okay.
much, PatZi.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you now. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hard Rain, the story of a British soldier in Northern Ireland. Hard Rain, the story of a British soldier in Northern Ireland. Watch and wait in the dark. Don't be afraid, killers can be killed. Like other men, don't be afraid.
Please subscribe. Showcase more great authors.